On a frigid winter evening, Warren Pierce sat by his fireplace, sipping a steaming mug of tea. The wind howled outside, rattling the sturdy logs of his remote Alaskan cabin. Years of living in one of the harshest environments on Earth had hardened him, made him one with the rhythm of nature. Yet, despite his rugged experience, nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him that night. A strange scratching at his front door broke the silence, accompanied by soft, mournful whines. Expecting a stray dog, Warren peered through the frosted window. His heart clenched as he took in the figures on his porch. 2 wolves, emaciated and dusted with snow. Their once proud coats were tangled, their ribs pressing against their skin, their breath forming weak clouds in the icy air. Wolves were wild predators, unpredictable and dangerous. Yet these creatures showed no aggression. They did not bare their fangs or snarl. Instead, their luminous eyes held something Warren never thought he'd see in such creatures: desperation. His instincts battled with reason, but compassion won. Cautiously, Warren cracked open the door. The closer wolf, slightly smaller with a patch of gray fur along its back, took an unsteady step forward. Its eyes, filled with a pleading intensity, locked onto his. The larger one, a scar running across its muzzle, stood watchful yet unthreatening. Against all better judgment, Warren stepped aside and gestured them in. The wolves hesitated only briefly before padding into the warmth of the cabin. The moment their paws touched the wooden floor, a visible shudder passed through them. They moved without panic, sniffing at the furniture, the pile of firewood near the hearth, their wild dignity still intact despite their weakened state. Warren tossed another log onto the fire, its golden glow dancing across the walls. The smaller wolf let out a soft whimper as it inched closer to the warmth. Was this the first time they had ever felt such comfort? Their bodies trembled from exhaustion and hunger. Warren rummaged through his modest pantry, pulling out some raw meat he had intended for himself. It felt reckless, feeding wolves, but he had no choice. He set the plate on the floor and stepped back. The smaller wolf approached first, sniffing cautiously before taking a tentative bite. The larger one soon joined, and in mere seconds, the food was gone. Their eyes flickered with something akin to gratitude. The tension in the room softened. The wolves curled up near the fireplace, their postures relaxing. Warren watched them with a mixture of awe and wariness. He had heard countless tales of wolf attacks, yet his gut told him these animals meant no harm. Their exhaustion had stripped them of the instincts that kept them distant from humans. Survival had brought them here. As the hours passed in a peculiar companionship, Warren found himself immersed in his old novel while the wolves dozed fitfully. Occasionally, the larger wolf whimpered in its sleep, paws twitching as if running in a dream. Warren fought the instinct to reach out and comfort it. Before retiring for the night, he laid out blankets in the warmest corner of the cabin. To his surprise, the wolves accepted his offering, curling up with noses tucked under their tails. Even as he double-checked the locks on his doors and windows, a habit in bear country, he knew the real risk lay inside with him. And yet, as he dimmed the lights, he prayed for a peaceful night. Dawn came sooner than expected. The first golden rays filtered through the frosted windows, casting a quiet glow over the cabin. Warren expected some sign of aggression or chaos, but he found neither. The wolves were awake, watching him with an expression he could only describe as weary gratitude. As he stoked the fire, he noticed the smaller wolf's limp had worsened overnight. Concerned, he approached with slow, deliberate movements. Kneeling beside it, he extended his hand. The wolf flinched but did not retreat. His fingers gently brushed against its hind leg, feeling the swelling beneath its fur. It let out a soft growl, not of warning, but of pain. "I'll do what I can," Warren murmured. Gathering his old first aid kit, he returned with a mix of bandages and antiseptics. He had no veterinary experience, but he knew enough to clean and wrap a wound. The real test was whether the wolf would allow it. The larger wolf watched him closely, its amber eyes sharp, ready to intervene. Warren moved with the utmost care, murmuring soothing words. The smaller wolf trembled under his touch, but did not pull away. With delicate precision, he cleaned and bandaged the injury. When he was done, the wolf exhaled, as if releasing some deep-seated tension. That morning, as Warren watched the two creatures settle once more by the fire, he realized something profound. Nature was not always the brutal, untamed force he had grown up believing it to be. Sometimes it sought refuge. Sometimes it needed a moment of warmth before returning to the wild. And sometimes, against all odds, a lone man and two wild wolves could find solace in each other. The wolf flinched and whimpered, its body tense beneath Warren's firm but careful hands. But surprisingly, it remained cooperative. Warren exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Done," he whispered, slowly removing his hands. The wolf exhaled through its nose, the sound almost like a sigh of relief. Warren offered a small smile, feeling an unexpected surge of empathy swell within him. There was something deeply humbling about tending to a wounded creature that should have feared him, yet chose to trust him instead. With the immediate medical needs addressed, Warren turned his attention to survival. He strode to his pantry and checked his supplies. He still had enough food to offer them another meal, but his stock was dwindling. The realization weighed on him. If these wolves intended to stay longer than a day or two, he would need a plan. The Alaskan winter was unforgiving, and securing more resources was no simple task. He decided to head out briefly, gathering firewood and scouting for any signs of potential game. As he pulled on his heavy coat and gloves, he glanced back at the wolves. Their sharp eyes followed his every move, but they remained still, their breath rising in soft plumes in the warmth of the cabin. "I'll be back soon," he murmured, as much to reassure himself as them. Stepping outside, Warren was greeted by an endless expanse of white. The overcast sky pressed low, and the wind cut through his layers, biting at his skin. He trudged through knee-high snow to the woodpile near the edge of his property, filling his sled with logs. Every so often, he scanned the horizon, half expecting to see more wolves, or worse, something dangerous lurking in the wilderness. Were these two part of a larger pack? Were they outcasts? If they had been cast out, what would happen if their pack came looking? He shook the thoughts away and let his gaze linger on the silent landscape. The beauty of it was stark, yet it carried an unforgiving loneliness. He imagined the smaller wolf limping through these drifts, desperate and hungry, perhaps on the brink of collapse. The thought made his chest tighten. No creature should have to endure that kind of suffering alone. Upon returning to the cabin, Warren found the wolves exactly where he had left them. The smaller one, now bandaged, was in better spirits, occasionally licking at its wounded leg. The larger wolf, ever vigilant, lifted its head as he crossed the threshold. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a fragile but growing trust. Warren unloaded the wood by the fireplace and stoked the flames. The warmth spread across his numb fingers, bringing welcome relief. He unwrapped a portion of his remaining meat, placing it on a plate and setting it on the floor. The wolves approached cautiously, hunger evident in their movements, yet still acutely aware of his presence. As they ate, Warren observed them in quiet fascination. It was surreal, two wild creatures sharing his home, eating his food, their golden eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. But he felt no fear, only a deepening bond forged through survival and an unspoken promise. Hours passed, and the cabin settled into a peaceful rhythm. Warren dozed in his armchair by the fire, the flickering glow casting dancing shadows on the walls. The wolves rested on the blankets he had arranged for them, occasionally rising to lap water from the bowl he had set nearby. A thought gnawed at him. He should contact someone, a ranger, perhaps a wildlife specialist. But what if they deemed the wolves a threat? What if they took them away? Or worse, decided they were better off put down? The idea made his stomach twist. He resolved to wait another day. Maybe, with their strength regained, they would return to the wild on their own. But the truth he wasn't willing to admit, not yet, was that a part of him didn't want them to leave. Their presence, though unusual, had given him a renewed sense of purpose, a reason to stay vigilant, a connection he hadn't known he needed. Night fell, and the wind howled outside. Inside the cabin was a beacon of warmth against the encroaching darkness. Restless, Warren found himself pacing. The wolves watched him with quiet understanding, as if they could sense his turmoil. Eventually, he sank into the chair, staring into the fire. What would the morning bring? Would the wolves depart, returning to the life nature intended for them? Or would they stay, forging an even deeper connection with the man who had opened his home to them? Dawn arrived with a pale, fragile light, casting long shadows over the snow-covered land. Warren stirred, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. Something felt different. He glanced toward the fireplace. The larger wolf was gone. A jolt of alarm shot through him. Had it slipped out in the night? Had it abandoned them, venturing back into the bitter cold? A low growl answered his fears. It came from the far corner of the room. Warren turned sharply, heart pounding. The larger wolf stood protectively over its injured companion, ears flattened, hackles raised. But it wasn't looking at Warren. It was looking at the door. Warren's breath caught in his throat. Slowly, cautiously, he moved toward the window. Outside, in the dim morning light, something shifted. At first, he thought it might be another animal, a moose perhaps, or a bear. But then a shape emerged from behind a thick pine tree, a human silhouette. Adrenaline surged through Warren. Visitors were rare this time of year, uninvited ones, even rarer. He grabbed his coat and a flashlight, pressing an ear to the door. The larger wolf let out another deep, warning growl, the sound reverberating through the small cabin. Whatever was out there, it wasn't welcome. Warren took a steadying breath. He had survived the Alaskan wilderness long enough to know that some dangers came on 4 legs, but others walked on 2. Warren watched as Kara continued to speak softly to the wolves, her tone steady and reassuring. The larger wolf, still protective of its injured sibling, kept a wary gaze on her, but its posture had relaxed slightly. The smaller wolf, though still weak, perked up at the sound of her voice, its ears twitching in recognition. "I have a transport crate outside," Kara said, glancing at Warren. "If we can get them inside without too much stress, I can take them back safely." Warren hesitated, his eyes flickering between the wolves and the woman who had tracked them across the snow-covered wilderness. He knew this was the right thing to do, knew they needed proper care, but something about letting them go felt heavier than he had expected. "Let me help," he said, his voice firm. Kara nodded, appreciating the gesture. "We'll have to move slowly. The last thing we want is to scare them into bolting." Together they worked to gain the wolves' trust. Kara moved methodically, letting the animals adjust to her presence, her every motion deliberate and gentle. Warren followed her lead, feeling the tension in the room ebb slightly as the wolves began to accept that no harm would come to them. With careful coordination, they managed to ease the injured wolf into the transport crate. It let out a soft whimper but did not resist. The larger wolf tensed, taking a step forward, but Warren placed a calming hand on its side. "It's okay," he murmured, more to himself than to the animal. The wolf turned its piercing eyes toward him, holding his gaze for a long moment before exhaling a deep, almost resigned breath. Then, as if understanding what was happening, it stepped back, allowing Kara to secure the crate. "That was surprisingly smooth," Warren admitted, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Kara gave a small smile. "They trust you. That helped more than you know."
Warren felt a pang of bittersweet pride at her words. He had never expected to bond with these wild creatures, but now, watching them prepare to leave, he realized just how much they had come to mean to him. They carried the crate outside, the wind howling around them as they approached Kara's vehicle. The snow had thickened, and the storm clouds above promised more to come. Warren helped secure the crate in the back of her truck, his gloved hands lingering on the edge for just a second longer than necessary. Kara shut the tailgate and turned to him. "You did a good thing here, Warren. They'll be safe now." He nodded but said nothing, watching as the wolves, the strange, unexpected guests who had changed everything, disappeared into the safety of her truck. As Kara climbed into the driver's seat, she rolled down the window. "If you ever want to check on them, come by the Wildlife Center. I think they'd like to see you again." Warren gave a small, tired smile. "Yeah, maybe I will." With that, the truck rumbled to life, its tires crunching against the snow. Warren stood in the cold, watching until the taillights vanished into the trees. Only then did he turn back toward his cabin, the warmth inside now feeling strangely empty. As he closed the door behind him, he glanced at the spot where the wolves had once laid. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, its warmth wrapping around him. But the silence felt different now. For the first time in a long time, Warren realized he wasn't alone anymore. Not really. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The wolves, sensing the shifting atmosphere, let out anxious whines, their ears pinned back against their heads. Warren tightened his grip on the handlebars, feeling the wind pushing against them as they neared the far side of the frozen creek. The snowmobile skidded slightly, its tread struggling for traction on the ice. Kara held onto him firmly, her radio clutched in her free hand, listening for any further updates from her team. "Almost there," Warren called over his shoulder, his voice barely audible over the howl of the wind. The dark clouds loomed overhead, swallowing what little light remained. Snow began to fall in thick, swirling flurries, reducing visibility to mere feet. Warren strained his eyes, searching for the red marker Dan had mentioned. The ice beneath them creaked ominously, a sharp reminder of the risk they were taking. "There!" Kara pointed ahead, her gloved hand barely visible in the storm. A flash of red peeked through the dense snowfall, a marker nailed to a pine tree at the far bank. Warren adjusted course, steering them toward the meeting point. The sled bumped over the uneven ice, jostling the wolves. The larger one let out a low growl but remained curled protectively around its injured sibling. As they reached the shore, the snowmobile's engine sputtered momentarily before Warren cut the power. The sudden silence was deafening, interrupted only by the howling wind. Kara jumped off, scanning the tree line. "Dan, do you copy?" "We've reached the marker." Static crackled before Dan's voice broke through. "We see you.
Hold tight, we're coming in from the east. Should be there in 5 minutes. Warren exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had made it, but 5 minutes in this worsening storm could feel like an eternity. He turned to check on the wolves. The smaller one lay still, exhausted but alert, its eyes heavy with fatigue. The larger one, however, had risen slightly, ears flicking toward the approaching sounds of snow crunching under boots. Through the whirling snow, 2 figures emerged, bundled in thick coats and carrying supplies. "Kara! Warren!" Dan's voice rang out. He and his companion trudged toward them, their faces obscured by scarves and goggles. "Let's get them loaded up quickly." Kara and Warren worked swiftly with Dan's team to transfer the injured wolf onto a padded stretcher. The larger wolf hesitated, reluctant to leave its sibling, but Kara spoke softly, coaxing it forward. The animal let out a low whimper but followed, never letting its companion out of sight. "Storm's getting worse," Dan warned as he secured the stretcher onto their sled. "We need to move now." Warren watched as the wolves were carefully strapped in, his chest tightening. He had known this moment would come, but he hadn't expected the pang of loss that accompanied it. For days they had shared this journey, man and beast surviving together in the unforgiving wilderness. Kara turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You gave them a chance, Warren. Without you, they wouldn't have made it." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "They deserve it." Dan clapped Warren on the shoulder. "You should come by the center sometime, check in on them." Warren gave a small smile. "Maybe I will." With one last glance at the wolves, one resting, the other watching him intently, Warren stepped back as Dan and his team prepared to leave. The sleds took off, disappearing into the storm, their tracks quickly covered by the relentless snowfall. As the last echoes of their departure faded, Warren stood in the quiet expanse, the wind whistling through the trees. The cabin, his solitary haven, waited behind him. It felt emptier now, but somehow he knew that the wilderness had given him something unexpected. Hope. Turning, he made his way back home, the memory of 2 wild creatures forever etched in his heart. Warren crouched beside the tracks, brushing away a thin layer of snow with gloved fingers. The prints were fresh, likely made after the storm had passed, and their pattern suggested a canine. Another wolf, perhaps? His pulse quickened. Could it be a member of the injured wolves' pack searching for them? He rose, scanning the surrounding woods, but the thick drifts and heavy-laden branches obscured his vision. The air was still, save for the occasional groan of snow slipping from tree limbs. If a wolf had passed through recently, it was likely still nearby, watching. Gripping the bundle of firewood tighter, Warren turned back toward camp. The last thing he needed was to get lost following a hunch. He trudged through the snow, his breath misting in the crisp morning air, and re-entered the shelter's perimeter. Kara looked up from where she was kneeling beside the smaller wolf. "Find anything useful?" Warren hesitated. "Yeah, plenty of firewood, but I also found tracks. Not from any small animal. Looked like a wolf." Dan, who had been adjusting a tarp near the fire, straightened. "Another one? That could be trouble. Or it could be their pack," Nina suggested. She glanced at the larger wolf, which had lifted its head, ears pricked forward as if listening. "Maybe they're trying to find them." Kara exhaled, considering. If their pack is nearby, that could be good or bad. They might be looking for them, or they might see us as a threat. "We should keep watch," Warren said, setting down the wood. "If they're out there, they might come closer." Throughout the day, the tension among the group simmered beneath their routine tasks. They reinforced the shelter, checked the wolves, and rationed supplies while keeping a watchful eye on the tree line. The larger wolf remained alert, often sniffing the air and shifting restlessly, but the smaller wolf was healing, its breathing steady, eyes clearer. As dusk fell, Warren took the first watch, standing near the fire with a lantern. The wilderness was quiet, but every now and then he swore he heard something, a soft crunch in the snow, the whisper of movement just beyond sight. The wolves sensed it too. The larger one sat upright, staring into the dark with keen eyes. Then a sound broke the silence, a distant, mournful howl. It echoed through the trees, long and haunting. The larger wolf immediately responded, lifting its head and letting out a deep, resonant call. Warren's heart pounded. There was no mistaking it now. Their pack was searching for them.
Despite the urgency gnawing at them, they knew their best option was patience. The storm had scattered everything, wolves, paths, and even their sense of time. They could do nothing but wait for Dan and Nina to clear the way. Warren sat near the fire, his mind restless. The image of the lone wolf haunted him, its ribs pressing against its ragged coat, its wary eyes flicking toward something unseen. He replayed the moment in his head, the way it had bolted, its fear not directed at him, but at something else. What if something's out there? He murmured more to himself than anyone else. Kara, who had been adjusting one of the blankets over the resting wolves, glanced at him. Something? He hesitated before responding. It wasn't just scared of me. It was looking past me, like something was behind me. Kara frowned. A predator? Warren shook his head. Could be, but wolves aren't at the top of the menu out here. Not unless it's a bigger predator, maybe another pack. Or people. Kara sat back on her heels, her brows knitting together. You think someone else is out here? Maybe. The unease that had settled in his gut refused to dissipate. That wolf was too weak to be acting territorial. It was afraid. A gust of wind rattled the branches above them, sending a flurry of snowflakes swirling into the fire's glow. Kara tightened her jacket and exhaled, her breath a visible cloud in the cold air. We should be careful, she said finally. But we can't go chasing ghosts. We have 2 wolves here that need us, and unless we have proof of something dangerous, we can't afford to be reckless. Warren nodded, though his mind wasn't settled. The wilderness was full of secrets. Some he had learned to ignore, others refused to let him go. Hours passed, and the fire burned low. Dan's voice crackled through the radio, a welcome break from the silence. We've managed to clear a good stretch, but there's still a lot of snow to get through. We might be able to get the truck closer by morning. Understood, Kara replied. We'll hold tight here. Warren stood, stretching stiff muscles, and moved toward the edge of the shelter, scanning the tree line. The night was dense, shadows stretching long under the moonlight. He strained his ears, listening beyond the crackle of flames and the occasional rustle of the wolves shifting on their blankets. Then, in the distance, he heard it. A howl, low, mournful, and alone. His breath caught. The same wolf, or another? He couldn't tell. Kara heard it too. She stood beside him, arms wrapped around herself. That's close, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. The sound carried something with it. A call, perhaps, or a warning. Either way, the wilderness wasn't as empty as it seemed. Memories of where he had last seen it. The forest stretched around him, a vast and silent expanse, the only sound the crunch of snow beneath his snowmobile and the distant sigh of the wind through the trees. Warren kept his eyes sharp, scanning for movement, for any sign of the wolf's tracks in the fresh powder.
He hadn't gone far when he spotted something. A faint set of paw prints leading away from the road, weaving unsteadily through the underbrush. He cut the engine and swung his leg over the snowmobile, stepping cautiously forward. The tracks were irregular, as if the wolf had been struggling. His gut clenched. If it was as weak as it had seemed earlier, it wouldn't last the night alone. He followed the trail deeper into the woods, moving slowly, carefully, listening for any sound beyond the wind and the whisper of shifting snow. Then, a rustle ahead. Warren froze, barely breathing. Through the fading light, he caught a glimpse of movement between the trees, a shadow, a flicker of pale fur. "Easy now," he murmured, stepping forward. The wolf was there, half hidden behind a fallen log, its body curled in a way that spoke of exhaustion. It lifted its head at his voice, ears flicking, eyes wary but unfocused. It wasn't growling this time. It was too weak. Warren crouched slowly, lowering himself to the wolf's level. "I'm here to help," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. He reached into his coat, pulling out a strip of dried meat he'd packed just in case. He extended it, watching as the wolf's nose twitched. A long pause. Then, hesitantly, the wolf stretched its neck forward, sniffing. Its ribs were visible beneath its patchy fur, its movements sluggish. Warren could see the shivers running through its body. It wouldn't survive the cold much longer. "You're coming with me," he murmured. He carefully removed his outer coat and moved slowly, wrapping it around the wolf's frail form. The wolf flinched but didn't resist, too tired to fight him off. With careful movements, Warren lifted the animal, feeling its weight shift against him. It was lighter than it should be, a reminder of just how dire its condition was. The trip back to the snowmobile was slow and painstaking, every step deliberate to avoid startling the wolf. When he reached the vehicle, he settled the wolf securely in the open space in front of him, keeping one arm around it as he started the engine. "Hang on," he murmured. The wolf let out a soft, exhausted sigh. The ride back felt longer than before, the growing darkness pressing in. When the shelter finally came into view, relief flooded through Warren. He saw Kara and Na standing outside, their figures illuminated by the fire's glow. As he pulled up, Kara hurried over, eyes widening as she took in the sight of the trembling wolf in his arms. "You found it," she breathed. "Yeah," Warren said, his voice tight with emotion. "But it wouldn't have lasted much longer." Kara nodded, already reaching for the medical supplies. "Let's get it inside." As they moved the wolf onto a set of blankets near its recovering packmates, the larger wolf let out a soft whine, stepping closer, sniffing the newcomer. A moment later, the smaller one did the same. A long beat of stillness stretched between them. Then the new wolf let out the faintest, weary huff. A spark of recognition flickered in its tired eyes. "It knows them," Na murmured. Warren let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The pieces were coming back together. They'd done it. And as the fire crackled and the wolves settled in together, Warren felt something shift inside him. Maybe, just maybe, they had given them a fighting chance. Remained unbroken. Months passed, and spring arrived in the Alaskan wilderness. The deep snow began to recede, revealing the earth beneath, while the rivers swelled with the thaw. Life stirred once more in the forests, and Warren found himself wondering if the wolves felt the shift too, if they sensed the coming of a season meant for renewal and new beginnings. One afternoon, as Warren sat on his porch sipping a cup of coffee, his radio crackled to life. "Warren, you there?" "It's Kara." He grabbed the receiver. "Yeah, I'm here. What's up?" I thought you'd like to know. The wolves are ready." A rush of anticipation surged through him. "For release?" "Yes," Kara confirmed. "They're strong, healthy, and acting just like they should. We've chosen a remote site not far from where you found them. If you want to be there, we're heading out tomorrow morning." Warren didn't hesitate. "Count me in." The next morning, he met Kara and her team at the Wildlife Center. The wolves, now robust and alert, paced within their transport crates. Seeing them like this, so different from the starving, broken creatures he had first encountered, filled him with pride. The journey to the release site was quiet, the weight of the moment settling over them. When they arrived, the team carefully positioned the crates on the forest floor. Kara motioned for Warren to do the honors. His hands trembled slightly as he unlatched the first door. The wolves hesitated for only a second before bolting forward, their paws kicking up fresh earth as they darted toward freedom. Warren watched, breath held, as the three wolves reformed their pack in the open wild. The larger wolf paused, glancing back at him one last time, eyes meeting his in silent acknowledgement. Then, just as quickly, it turned and disappeared into the trees with the others following close behind. A deep sense of fulfillment settled over Warren as he stood there, watching the wilderness reclaim them. He knew he might never see them again, but that was how it should be. They were home. Kara stepped beside him, her voice gentle. "You gave them a second chance, Warren. Not everyone would have gone as far as you did." He exhaled, feeling lighter than he had in months. "Maybe they gave me one too." The two of them stood in companionable silence, the wind whispering through the trees, carrying with it the sound of the wolves' return to the wild. A story that had begun in desperation had now found its perfect ending, one of survival, reunion, and above all, freedom. As the days passed, Warren found himself reflecting on the journey that had led him to this moment. What had begun as a solitary existence in the wilderness had transformed into something far richer, more profound. His bond with the wolves had given him purpose beyond mere survival. It had reawakened something in him, a connection to the world beyond the walls of his cabin. Seasons changed, and with them the forest seemed to breathe in a new rhythm. The snow thawed into rushing streams, the trees unfurled their emerald leaves, and the air was alive with birdsong. Warren knew the wolves would soon move on, drawn by instinct to explore lands beyond his humble sanctuary. Still, they lingered near, weaving in and out of the trees, watching him with the knowing eyes of kindred spirits. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, bathing the world in hues of gold and crimson, Warren stood at the edge of the tree line once more. The wolves gathered a short distance away, their bodies poised with an energy that spoke of change. He felt it in his bones. This was the moment. With a deep breath, he raised a hand in quiet farewell. The largest wolf, the one he had nursed back to health in those first uncertain days, met his gaze for a long moment. Then, with a flick of its tail, it turned and loped forward, the others following in its wake. As they disappeared into the vast wilderness, one of the younger wolves paused, glancing back just as Warren had imagined. A soft chuckle escaped him as he nodded in silent understanding. They were free now, as they were always meant to be. But the impact they had left on his heart, on his very soul, would never fade. With a final glance at the fading silhouettes of his unlikely companions, Warren turned back toward his cabin. The wind carried with it the scent of pine and earth, whispering through the trees like an old friend. As he stepped inside, he knew his world had forever changed, no longer just a man in the wild, but a part of its intricate, beautiful harmony. And somewhere, Deep in the heart of the forest, a pack of wolves carried a piece of him with them, just as he carried them within his heart.